Welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast, your source for information on hunting, fishing, and all of your outdoor passions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast. My name is Mike Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about long-range shooting. So, shooting has seen a great resurgence in the market today. There's a lot of people that are just getting into shooting or getting back into shooting, and especially like long range is kind of a craze these days. So with me today is Craig Arnzen of Area 419. He's gonna give us kind of a crash course in long range shooting and what it really means and some tips to become more effective at it. So Craig, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I think to your point, long range is something it's blowing up. It's been, 8-10 years since we had this period in time where a lot of things happened kind of all together. You had Ruger roll out the Ruger precision rifle, and it was $1,000 and was a really capable rifle with a lot of cool features. That was about the time that Hornady decided to put 6.5 Creedmoor ammo on the shelf at a match grade at $24 a box. And Vortex, their PST Gen 1 was about $1,000, and it had repeatable exposed turrets and good glass and a nice mil reticle that you could get something out of. And those things all happened also about the time the movie American Sniper hit the box office and was explosive in its success. All of those things happen right together, and suddenly somebody without an enormous investment could go pick up a rifle and an optic and a box of ammo off the shelf at a SCHEELS and go shoot 1,000 yards. And without a huge barrier to entry on finance or knowledge, could start having a lot of fun at a range that they never thought was possible before. And it's really run wild in the decades since then, and in a little less than a decade, but about that time. And it's been really cool to watch. I know that at that time I was an enthusiast that just thought it was super cool. I grew up on a farm around guns. I'd always had one in my hand and always enjoyed the idea of marksmanship, but the idea of shooting past 100 yards or 200 yards, that wasn't a thing, right? That's so far. I couldn't shoot that far. My rifles had iron sights on them. I didn't know how to do that. But then when the idea of being able to pull a trigger and make that contact, make impact at not just 100 or 200 yards, but here's 400 yards, 600 yards, 800 yards, 1,000, and then being able to push out toward a mile. The technology was there. The market had made it attainable. And, I got hooked big, fast, and in a hurry, and now get to live the dream doing what I do at Area 419. But long range has, in all its forms, changed the firearm marketplace in the last handful of years, and I think it's pretty cool. Yeah,
absolutely. Everyone gets excited about shooting longer distances and just being able to, hear that ping of the target out at 500, 600, 700 yards.
Shooting steel is really, really gratifying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not a huge long-range enthusiast, but it really interests me, so I'm excited to do this podcast.
Most people that get into long range, there's a real level of nerd about us. The idea that you can solve the problem of what's going to happen downrange and then immediately check your work on steel, that's pretty slick.
Absolutely. Yeah. I started getting interested in long range shooting when I started applying for mule deer tags. Okay. So it was I started out hunting Minnesota, there's a lot of woods where I was at. I'd be in the woods. My longest shot is 60 yards. Right. I'd sit on a field edge. My longest shot is maybe 200. So I'm using my dad's old 30-06.
And the 30-06 inside 150 has taken the substantial majority of small game taken in North America.
Lot of deer shot with that caliber, and a lot of deer continue to be shot with that caliber. But so I moved to North Dakota and started applying for muley tags, and I finally drew in year 7. So, and actually my wife drew before me. So yeah, it's a little sore subject. She had less points, drew earlier, but I made the best out of that situation because then I could go out with my bow and I could do scouting trips for her. And then it gave me a reason to buy a long range rifle. Right. So, I ended up with a 6.5 Creedmoor and started shooting longer and, got myself comfortable out to decent distances, but, still like, my capability is nowhere near what the capability of like my rifle is. So, like to bring long-term or long range shooting into perspective, like how do you define it?
So I think shooting long range can mean a lot of different things. Long range shooting with 22 long rifle is starting to become popular, but what's long range with a 22 is very obviously something different than what's long range with your 6.5 Creedmoor or a 3.38 Lapua or a 375 Chi-Tac. I think something begins to be long range when the idea of drop, so gravity over distance, or drift in the wind become very real factors when it comes to hitting your target. There's basic fundamentals of marksmanship which matter if you've got a carbine at 25 yards or you're prone on a rifle shooting at 1,000. So there's basic marksmanship that's involved in all of it, but it starts, in my opinion, to be, and there will be somebody in the comments section that's super mad about this. Long range to me is when drag and drop start to be really meaningful parts of the equation. So with a 22, that might start to happen at 100 yards, or for certain centerfire rifles, that might be 400, 500, 600 yards, or 800, 900, 1,000. So it's all relative, but at the point that you're solving problems for what's happening downrange, not simply on the gun, to me, that's long range.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And, somebody that's not into long range at all and wants to get into it, like, what are the necessities?
You need an accurate rifle, and accuracy is all very relative. If you're going to want to go shoot bench rest, that's a different level of accuracy than if you're simply trying to take medium range game, or if you are somebody trying to do varmint control on the farm. But you need a rifle that is capable of the accuracy that you need. You are in nearly all long range situations, and there are iron sight purists out there, but you're going to need an optic with either the ability to adjust on the turrets or a reticle that gives you the ability to hold with some finite level, like a nice, the classic is the mil-dot reticle, but some sort of measurable etched reticle. And then you're going to need ammunition that is capable of the accuracy potential of that rifle and optics system. Once you have those things, then comes the really hard part. You're going to start to need to build knowledge. A really good resource for anybody that's watching or listening to this and thinks they're interested in shooting long range. Ryan Kleckner wrote a book, and I think it's the Long Range Handbook. When you look it up on Amazon, look up Ryan Kleckner Long Range, and it's an orange book with a reticle on the front. I've bought a couple and had them shipped to the office and then given them to guys in the shop that want to learn about shooting long range. We say, read this, then come back, and then we'll start to really work intensely. And it is a great book of here are the basics of long range. Here's the idea of what happens when a bullet leaves and starts to travel distance. Here's what drop is. Here's how it works. And no, your bullet doesn't actually rise out of the end of the barrel. Here's how to understand your optical sight line with your bore line. All of those very rudimentary basics that give you the level of understanding that you need to go out and start to practically learn. It's a great resource. It's Ryan Kleckner, Long Range Shooter, Fundamentals of Long Range, or something along those lines. It's an orange book with a reticle on the front. You'll find it everywhere. Okay, gotcha. Interesting. So I obviously haven't read that book anymore, or yet. Looking for a crash course. Yep.
So
it's an easy read. A couple evenings or whatever. It might be 100 pages or so, but it's not a terribly intense read. If you want an intense read, Brian Litz is like the encyclopedia writer for ballistics, and he's a fabulous guy. But that book by Kleckner is a good start, and what he walks through in it is, here's what your rifle is, here's how to set it up, and here's a basic understanding of it. And anybody can buy and read that book. Yeah. Where things start to get different is when you decide, okay, I think I understand the book. I'm going to pick up my rifle, pick up my ammo, and I'm going to go out to the range and I'm going to lay down. That's when it's really good to have a friend, or it's really good to show up to a match. You know, if you want to learn a whole lot about shooting long range really, really quickly, go find a PRS match. Because it's fun, it's dynamic, it'll be an inviting place for you. I think you'll learn more about the dynamic nature of long range there than you might necessarily at a BR or an F-class match that is more fixed distance. That's the way that I learned the most quickly. I thought I was cool watching YouTube and reading.
For people that don't know those acronyms.
Sure. The PRS is the Precision Rifle Series. It is the premier nationwide series for shooting in what is considered a practical tactical style. Some people used to call these sniper matches, but to me a sniper match is more of a ruck fieldcraft match that includes shooting. But it is shooting steel targets at variable distances from variable positions. Sometimes you're prone, sometimes you're shooting off of rocks or other sort of natural environment. You might be shooting out of the window of a shoot house. It is a sport that a precision rifle competition that emphasizes the dynamic application of long range principles, and you gotta have the marksmanship to go with it. And you'll find 1 day matches all over the country. The PRS is a center fire series. There are also rimfire series. PRS has their rimfire series, and then the NRL, the National Rifle League, also has a 22 series that's very large. These are both great opportunities to start to learn what happens at distance with something that people might not think about with just a 22. It's inexpensive. It's a lot of fun, and you can learn all the things with a 22 at 200 yards that you can learn with your 6.5 Creedmoor at 1,000. Mm-hmm. So it's a fun way to get into it.
Yeah. So would that 22 be your recommendation on somebody that kind of wants to get started into this and doesn't have anything yet?
Yeah. If you don't have anything yet, a 22 is a great way to do it. Whether it's the CZ457 is a fabulous rifle, and one that has sold exceptionally well recently as a precision 22. It's nice bolt action. It's mag fed. People are picking up and using the new Tika T1X. They're doing really well with that. But if it's just a 10-22, that's also totally fine. Find an accurate 22, put an optic on it that gives you the ability to either dial on the turrets or use the reticle to make adjustments to what's happening downrange. And go burn ammo. The beauty of a 22 is you're not going to burn up your barrel. Yeah. And, a 50 count box of even premium 22 ammo is less than $10. So it's an inexpensive way to go have a ton of fun, and you can plink and you can shoot. 22 doesn't require really high end steel. So inexpensive steel targets, you're going to learn a lot very quickly, because the beauty of steel is you get an instant feedback loop. It's binary. You hit it or you didn't. And over time, you'll also be able to see on that steel where on the steel you hit because of the reactive nature of the target. So 22 is a great way to learn.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So let's say somebody's picked up the necessary equipment for them, got their gun, got a good high quality optic, got some ammo. Like, how do you start just dialing it in and understanding the mathematics behind it?
External ballistics is the study of what happens to a bullet from the time it leaves the muzzle to the time it reaches the target. So when it's inside the rifle, you talk about internal ballistics. That's a big conversation for a different day when we want to talk about reloading and about the idea of what happens when that combustion takes place. Terminal ballistics is a huge conversation in the hunting community, and that's what happens when the bullet hits the target. When you're shooting steel, it hits or it doesn't, and it goes ping. But if you're taking a shot on an animal, the idea of how much energy is left, how that bullet's going to react, the terminal ballistic effects are very important. But external ballistics are really important to a long-range shooter, because you're going to learn over time that what happens between the rifle and the target is there's a lot that you can understand, but there's also a little mystery, because when you're shooting long range, there's a lot of space, a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of air moving around. You know, the idea of a butterfly flaps its wings. But one of the really good ways to get started in understanding what happens when that bullet leaves your rifle is to understand the basics of what is bullet drop, what affects it. You're going to see a lot of acronyms thrown around like BC, which is ballistic coefficient. So that's how smoothly the bullet flies through the air, you know, how resistant it is to the effects of drag and drop. You'll hear DA, which is density altitude. You know, the environment that you're shooting in matters. So if you're way up in elevation, you're in the mountains, you're taking a shot on an elk in the Rockies, your bullet will fly meaningfully different over time relative to if you are shooting in, you know, southern Louisiana and you're on a deer hunt that's at sea level in a very humid environment. You know, all of these things make a difference. So
you're telling me if I want to go on an elk hunt and I sight my rifle perfect here in Fargo, it's going to be off?
Your zero may be relatively close, but what's going to happen between 0 and 100 isn't a big deal. But the way that bullet falls from 100 to your target at 600 can matter. Now, between 100 and 600 matters, and then between 600 and 1100, it matters significantly more.
Yeah, I mean, because everything is multiplied as the distance increases.
Sure, everything becomes more dramatic, and you know, you're driving your car down the highway, and as the wind changes or the air changes, or the way your vehicle moves through the air, it feels different to drive. Well, that's going to happen to the bullet too. So when you're flying through thinner air, there's less drag, and you know, gravity makes the bullet fall at a constant rate, but the speed of the bullet matters between your muzzle and your target. So the level of knowledge that a person can get into in external ballistics is enormous. A great recommendation, though, you can get out your phone, you can download an app, and you get Streelock, or Hornady's got their 4DOF, which is the 4 degrees of freedom calculator. Applied Ballistics has things like this. A good ballistic calculator, and these are either free or $20 phone apps. You know, pick your level of complexity and features that you would like. Inexpensive phone apps that can start to help you build drop tables or dope cards. Dope is the acronym for data on previous engagements, but people will use their dope. You know, you'll see pictures of rifles with a grid, like a little Excel spreadsheet taped to the buttstock. You think, well, what's this guy doing? Well, it's the idea that this rifle is going to have this much drop or this much fall off at X distance. So building a good dope card, you can do this. The best way, I think, to start is by building a table, JB and Ballistics on your computer, on your browser, or through one of these apps. Get a baseline for what should that rifle do, and that's going to be dependent on your bullet. So in general, heavier bullets will fly flatter, or will at the same speed. A heavier bullet with a higher BC will fly straighter and flatter than a lighter bullet, which is typically going to have a lower ballistic coefficient. So these really heavy bullets, if you're looking at Hornady 6.5 Creedmoor ammo, you might find some stuff where the projectile is 129 grains, other stuff where it's 140 grains, other stuff where it's 147 grains. And what you'll typically find is as those bullets become heavier, the ballistic coefficient of that bullet, or the ability to move through the air without degradation of speed or added wind deflection. You know, these heavier high BC bullets, they're in vogue now, and for very good reason. But understanding how your bullet and your rifle at the speed that you're shooting it is going to react downrange is important. So get your rifle, build yourself a dope card in using one of the free or inexpensive resources that are out there. And then there is no way to replicate the simple idea of go set up some targets and shoot and true up that data.
Yeah, there's no substitute to just getting out there.
You got to go do it.
Flinging some lead.
Yeah. And the cool byproduct is it's a lot of fun. But the idea that you're gonna find out what the bullet should do, what should happen downrange, and then you're going to go out and verify it. And you're going to learn, well, it was a little different. Why was it different? Well, the speed of the bullet matters greatly. So did you have good muzzle velocity? Was your zero actually good? Your bullet might have a certain advertised ballistic coefficient. Maybe that lot of bullets is a little bit better or a little bit worse. Those things can start to really matter at distance. When I go shoot matches, something that has started happening is Applied Ballistics is the authority on external ballistics in the precision rifle world. They've got a fabulous Doppler radar system. So you guys sell the lab radar, which is the 12-inch orange box that pings radar and tells you how fast a bullet or an arrow from a bow is moving. Well, that's the consumer grade version. They have the uber professional grade version that's probably a $50,000 unit that they'll stand up behind people, and they'll even for us that are competing, let us build personalized drag models that we can upload to our handheld ballistic calculators that give us personalized ballistic coefficient based on the speed that our rifle is shooting, because that matters. The lot of bullets that we're shooting, because it's manufacturing, everything's a little bit different. How much wear may be imparted on the bullets by our barrels and the condition that they're in, what twist rate our barrels are. All of these things ultimately matter. Now, if they matter to an individual or not is quite variable. But understanding exactly what's happening to our bullets when they leave the barrel is important. And the principles that we're applying to this or trying to figure out at the highest level of competition, these are all things that are ultimately trickling into super consumable things for an enthusiast. Because if you're going to go on your phone and download the Applied Ballistics calculator, when you say that you're shooting federal gold medal 6.5 Creedmoor with 140 grain burgers in it, because they're gathering all this data from the field, they know that they've not just tested one or two batches of 140 burgers, but because of what they're doing in the field, they've tested 100 batches of 140 burgers across an enormous speed spectrum, an enormous spectrum of barrel life.
With a greater sample size equals greater accuracy.
Exactly. And it's a cool way that I see what's happening at a competitive kind of super user level becoming something that's valuable to that person that's walking into a SCHEELS for a first time, grabbing a rifle and saying, I want to go shoot far. I want to be able to hunt at a greater distance. I want my maximum effective range as a hunter not to be 200 yards with Grandpa's 30-06, but I want to go kill that muley at 500 or 600. How do I learn to do it? How do I get behind the gun in a manner that I can see that animal where it is, understand what's going on around me, make the adjustments that I need to do, and make a shot that will, at a very, very high rate, be not only successful but ethical. That's where long range goes for most people. Is how do I make that shot at greater distance? For some of us, it becomes a sport or a competition or a hobby, or even something that we do professionionally.
Yeah,
but for most
others,
people,
it turns into like a job and an obsession.
The obsession thing happens really quickly.
Yeah,
it's one of the problems with shooting long range is the slope becomes very slippery. The first time you pull a trigger at a distance that you can't think you could possibly hit that target, and then you hear the ping. That's pretty sweet.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think a lot of people can wrap their head around elevation, you know, the up and down. And where it starts to get a little confusing is like your windage, your side to side. Can you walk through the variability in that and how to like bring your understanding to like an in-field application?
So I will say something that most people who do a lot of shooting are also happy to say. If anybody ever tells you they actually know everything that's going on with wind, they're a dirty liar.
Perfect. That makes me feel better.
Wind is such a difficult thing, and the problem with wind is it always changes. And the further you shoot, the more different wind conditions you're going to shoot through. So you're hunting that muley and you're on a ridge top, and that the mule deer that you want to shoot's on a different ridge. It's 450 yards away. There may be 7 wind conditions between you and that deer. And what you're having to do is make assessments based on, there's a bush over there that's kind of twitching, and that flower over there laid down a little bit, and I saw a bird take off into the wind this way. And understanding wind isn't just taking your kestrel, your wind meter, and holding it up where you are. Mm-hmm. It's having a baseline understanding of what's happening around you in a macro sense, and then finding little micro clues between you and the target to try to isolate what that window may be. In competitive shooting, we'll create something called brackets on winds. If I'm looking downrange, I don't just want to say it's 6 mile an hour, because it's not. The wind changes all the time. So I may create a bracket that says it's between 4 and 7 mile an hour, and look at my dope in at that distance and say, oh, well, that means it's going to be between 3 and 5/10 of a mil of wind hold. So I can start to use my reticle and know that if I make good trigger pulls, then that bullet's going to land inside a space. I'm creating what are my margins for error. In hunting, one of the hard things to do is to understand what that margin for error is from an ethical, allowable standpoint. What is your vital zone? What is your kill zone on that animal? And based on the size of that zone on that animal and the distance and the wind conditions, if you can say, I think the wind is between 6 and 9, you might have a kill zone. You might be inside your margin for error. That if you make a good shot, you're going to land inside the vital zone. You're going to be able to make an ethical shot. But if the wind is super variable, or you're at a distance where that margin for error becomes smaller and smaller, because from a relative standpoint, that animal becomes smaller and smaller. Understanding where those windows are gets important. But wind is something that is going to push your bullet, and it's also going to change the direction that it's flying. So some people may think that wind is something that it takes your bullet that's flying straight and just moves it over in space. The problem with wind, especially as you shoot further and further, it's a compounding effect. So yes, it is moving your bullet over, but it's also misdirecting your projectile. So it's changing the direction that it flies, and you get an effect that compounds on itself. If you play golf and you hit just a bad driver and you got a big slice, it doesn't just fly off at a 10, 15 degree angle. It progressively gets worse.
Yep.
That's something that happens with a bullet and wind too, is it starts moving off course, and then it's not just the wind pushing it, but it's the wind misdirecting it. So the best advice I can give on wind is, just like drop, start working on, and all of these ballistic calculators will also give you good wind data if you feed it any data. So if you say, what is my dope? And the other tricky thing, wind also wreaks havoc with elevation because of what's called crosswind hop, or the Bernoulli effect, or I think Bernoulli is the right one, whereas that bullet is spinning in a clockwise manner looking from the back, because most barrels are right twist. If you have a wind coming from the right relative to where your shooter position, your bullet will try to climb up the wind. And if the wind's coming from your left, your bullet will be pushed down by the wind. So wind also affects elevation, and that's something that a good ballistic calculator will tell you. But knowing that at X range, at 500 yards, a 5 mile an hour wind is going to do this, and a 10 mile an hour wind is going to do this. Those are good basics to get a sense of. And at some of those distances and speed, the idea of crosswind hop or deflection don't matter so much. But understanding that at every distance with your drop card, having good data on what's going to happen in the wind is pretty important. The hard part about the wind is truing up your wind calls, because you don't actually know. And you go to a bench rest match and they've got flags every 5 feet so that they can see what's happening with the wind across the ground. Most people don't actually get that opportunity. So
yeah, especially if you're like out in the field hunting. Like,
Yeah, so you're
gonna
not
get that.
using the real world to true up your data. You're using the data and the feedback you get on target to true up your ability to perceive what's happening downrange. One good tip that was given to me, and there's a ton more nuance to it, but it's worth a conversation, is when you have to pick one wind speed or wind condition to build data off of. A generic rule is to try to figure out what's happening 2/3 of the way to the target. And for that to be the singular wind condition that you start to build your data from. Reason being, wind matters more as the bullet slows down. So the fastest the bullet will ever be is at the moment it leaves the barrel. But you don't want to you want it to be slowing down, but you don't want to wait all the way until the target, because at the target, the wind doesn't have any time to cause you problems.
Yeah.
So the idea...
It's already caused your problems.
Right.
At that point.
The game's over. If you've got some odd wind condition there, who cares? The bullet's... It's over. So the idea of figuring out what's happening at about that 2/3 point, so half to 2/3, that back half, if you can make a really good guess on what's happening environmentally there and pull in that data, you're probably going to have more success than if you simply use where you're standing, because what you feel on your face can be a liar, especially if you're shooting from, you're in a tree stand and you're looking out over an exposed field. Well, that exposed field is significantly different than sitting in a tree line.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So what you feel is lying to you, or it can be deceiving you or giving you partial information, or you might get some weird directionality that comes from the wind coming up a tree line and wrapping.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like if you're in a deer stand, you're sitting on an edge or like a pinch point or something,
Right.
and that's naturally going to change your wind direction a little bit based off of like what's out in the middle of the field.
Yeah, so one of the cool things you talked about with your wife, she drew that tag before you did, so you got to go out scouting. You went out with your bow. Understanding where you're going to hunt and where the cuts are. I've been in situations shooting matches, especially when you shoot, big country, up here, out west, where there may be something happening because of a ridge line at 500, 600, 800 yards that if you don't know your terrain, you'd have no idea. You'd miss a shot by a huge amount and not know why. A cool resource for things like this, if you bow hunt, there's an app, I think it's called Windy, it'll give you overhead maps of areas that have the prevailing winds almost like little wind flags. A friend who's an archer, a bow hunter, showed it to me because he will use it when he's out in the woods stalking to try to stay on the right side of the wind from what he's stalking. You don't want your scent to be carried to what you're hunting. So he would use the generic prevailing winds of geography to protect his scent, protect himself from being smelled. But what it can also do is identify some of these ways that wind move through cuts. And as air, think of wind as a liquid flowing through something. Liquid and gas obviously have different characteristics, but they also have some that are the same. If you were to make a little Play-Doh model of the area that you're going to hunt, and you have all the little crevices and all the little ridge lines and all the tree pockets, and then from one side you poured a bunch of water onto it, that water wouldn't simply go straight across.
Yeah.
It would move and do all these kind of things and ride up down ridges, and it would go up and down at some points. People will, especially in big country, miss shots on elevation because they don't understand that the wind is doing this up and down geography. So if you're shooting that mule deer that's on a different ridge, but you're shooting up, there's the idea of, that shooting at elevation can change, or shooting at an angle can change your elevation. But also if the wind is at your back, when that wind hits the face of that ridge that you're shooting up, it may lift that bullet. So understanding geography is a thing too, when a hunter is trying to, or a competitive shooter is trying to take some of these things and apply them. What is the ground doing to that wind? What are the trees doing to that wind? What's happening around you? Wind is the number one reason people miss shots. Poor marksmanship fundamentals, I'll say, are number one. I mean, you got to be able to put the gun on target. You got to be able to make good trigger pull. You need good follow through. You need to understand what's happening with your rifle. But if you have that down, if you're a guy that can sit, on a bench or prone or practice the position you're going to be shooting from. So if you're a stand hunter and you know that you've got a stand where you've got a bar right here, get yourself a game changer and sit there and practice on paper at 100 yards shooting from that position. Get really good at it. But let's say you got that nailed. If you know how to do that, the number one reason you're going to miss is going to be wind, because it's such a variable. It's so complicated. There's so much nuance to it, and there are so many ways that a shooter can be deceived by wind based on things that they either don't know, can't know, or haven't taken the time to learn.
Makes sense. So, I mean, living in Fargo, North Dakota here, like, it's flat as a pancake. If you've never been to Fargo, how do I practice for stuff like that? Say I want to get myself comfortable in those like mountain situations. Is there a way to do that?
Go shoot in the mountains.
Go drive out to the mountains and go shoot.
So I brought up the idea of going and shooting matches. There was a match just this past weekend in southwest Wyoming, just up from Salt Lake City. I shot it last year. Hornady puts it on. It's a match that is on this unbelievable piece of property. It's a big ranch out there that I know Hornady's got a lease on, and they take part of their lease and donate it to this match. But you're shooting up mountainsides, and you're shooting from one ridge to another. The best way to really become a well-versed shooter is just go shoot a bunch, man. I mean, it's difficult to learn those things. What you can learn here is watching wind move around. You have what I will call here easy wind. Now, you have a lot of it, which makes it difficult. But when you guys are out shooting, if it's blowing, it's fairly constant. There's not a lot of stuff in the way. You get a pretty solid sense of direction. So if we've got a 12 to 15 mile an hour wind coming from 5 o'clock, it's probably going to be a 12 to 15 mile an hour wind coming from 5 o'clock for a little while. And we're not having to worry about when we shoot from flat empty space into more flat empty space if things change between here and there. So learning what wind does to a projectile this is a good environment for it, because you have wind. Some parts of the country don't get a lot of it, so being able to practice in wind at all is tough. But you guys have wind that's fairly shootable because of its consistency. So go out, shoot, get comfortable, shoot in different directions. If there's a prevailing wind that is always from the west, wherever you are, try to find ways to shoot not only where that's a 9 o'clock crosswind, but can you change your shooting position and your target position where sometimes that's not a 9 o'clock, but a 7 o'clock or an 11 o'clock? Or can you flip around and that be something coming from your right side, and understanding that you have a full value wind when it's at 90, but when you move to 45 degrees coming in, that's not just because you've cut that angle in half. That's not a half value wind. That's a quarter. That's a much lower value wind. That's like a quarter value wind, because of the way that wind interacts with that projectile. So go out and do it is the only experience. The only thing you can really give. Emil Praslik is a guy in the long range shooting community who there are videos out there of him explaining wind. Emil has a great, rich history of competitive shooting, and was I'm gonna butcher this. Sorry, Emil. I believe he was in charge of the AMU for the Army Marksmanship Unit for a period of time. The man has forgotten more than I'll ever know, but he has at various events given lessons on how to read wind and how to manage it. And it comes down to if you really want to be good at wind, you need to be acutely understanding of what's happening around you, and not just the weatherman says it's blowing 10 mile an hour from the west, but what's that bush over there doing? What's that flower over there doing? How does that matter between here and where I am? And there's no replacement for reps on wind. I got a lot of reps. I'm still not good at wind. I don't know that there are enough to really be good at wind. Some guys are, and those are the guys that are winning every weekend.
Yeah, just a ton of interesting stuff to think about when you're doing long range. So you did mention like one of the most important factors is obviously your form.
Yep.
So what are some tips you have? Maybe do you have like a top 5 tips for your form?
Okay.
And what to think about when you're shooting long range stuff?
The first thing that I will tell you to do is don't only shoot from the bench or from prone, especially if you're hunting or if you want to go compete. The number of shots that you take from non-prone positions, pretty high. You know, how often when you're out hunting mule deer can you actually lay down on level terrain and shoot some pristine prone shot? That doesn't happen. That's not real. Mm-hmm. When you're shooting in a match, you may shoot some stages prone, but you're also going to shoot from something dynamic. So if you really want to become good with the rifle in less comfortable situations. So the first thing that I can encourage somebody to do is don't just shoot prone. Get off your belly, get off your bench, find a way to, lay that rifle across the back of your truck bed, or, shoot from the top of a fence post, or find some natural terrain in the V of a tree. If you are a fabulous prone shooter, but then go out somewhere and have to take a shot from the crook of a tree and you've never done it before, the fact that you're a fabulous prone shooter becomes really, really unimportant, because you're going to be out of your element. So getting out of that comfort zone and finding a way to do things in more practical manners, that's the number one piece of advice I can give there. The second one, do a whole lot of dry fire. Modern centerfire rifles are not going to be hurt by dry firing. And there used to be this piece of wisdom around that I don't feel too good about, the idea that when you pull the trigger, it should surprise you. No, big no. You should know exactly what that firearm's going to do when you pull the trigger. So the idea of, get in a position behind your rifle, close your eyes, close the bolt, obviously make sure the rifle's unloaded and everything's safe. Close the bolt, get your hand in position, and make that trigger pull. Getting used to that feeling, getting used to that sensation, understanding how the mechanics work, so that all of those things that when it's time to take a shot that need to take place, anything that can be muscle memory should be. Mm-hmm. So how is your shoulder on the gun? How's your cheek on the gun? Where are your hands? What's going on with your eyes? How are the mechanics of closing the bolt, checking your safety, pulling that trigger? All of those things that you could practice sitting in your living room, annoying your wife, do it. Those are reps they're free, and they'll pay off. You wanted 5. Let's see, what else can we get to here?
I want something on breathing tips.
Learn to control your breathing when things get feisty. Shooting at the range or practicing can be very mellow. Got all the time in the world. There's nothing pressuring you. Nothing's on the line. You're just pulling the trigger and trying to hit a piece of steel. When you get to that point and you feel good, do some push-ups and do it again, and then shoot. Or run 10 yards, turn around, run 10 yards back, and shoot again. It's not maybe a popular thing to say, but if you want to be a good marksman, get in shape a little bit. Be able to understand what happens to your body when it gets worked up. Be able to manage your breathing when you're under stress. If you're hunting that mule deer and you just walked up to the top of a ridge and you're gassed a little bit, but there she is, beautiful 4x4, next ridge over. You got to be able to take a shot, right? Mm-hmm. But if you don't know how to take a shot when you're under some sort of physical stress, you're not going to take a good shot. So this goes to that first principle of get off your belly. It's get out of your comfort zone when you're practicing and shooting. And this is something you can do with dry fire as well. What is your body going to do from a mechanical standpoint when your heart rate's up a little bit or your breathing rate's up a little bit? So practice what you're going to go do, not just laying at a range, shooting paper at 100 yards from prone or a bench. Go practice that application and all the things you may run into. Matches are also good for this because When you're shooting a match, you're going to get your rifle and all your gear, and you're going to get up to the line and get ready to start a stage. And there are a lot of things in your head. Where are all the targets? What's my dope got to be from target to target? What's the order of shooting? What do the positions look like? And then the range officer's going to look at you and say, "Shooter, do you understand the course of fire?" And you're excited. You're going to say yes. He's going to say, "All right, shooter ready, engage." And he'll hit the shot timer, and this beep will go off. And you've seen Men in Black, and they have that little pen where they'll flash in your eyes and make you forget everything that you've seen. That's what the shot timer does. And it creates a level of stress and panic that even as you get up there and you're ready to shoot, you've got everything going on, when that beep happens, if you don't have a lot of reps, and even if you do have a lot of reps, everything starts to move a little different. You get a stress environment that's real, and it's really terribly difficult to reproduce on your own. And I know a lot of guys that have been avid long-range hunters that have gotten into the match scene and said, I'm a better hunter because I shoot matches. Because when it comes to shooting in that uncomfortable situation and making decisions on time, really hard to replicate that in a controlled setting. So a match is obviously a very controlled setting, but if you get your heart rate up and you've got to make a decision on the clock and you've got to think quickly, that's a great way to get in good practice for critical thinking when time matters. You don't want to practice that when you're hunting, when it can cause you to not be able to get a good shot on an animal, or to, worst case scenario, take a bad shot and wound something. Getting those stress reps is what we'll call them for here. Those reps under stress, under duress, not comfortable on your belly. I can't stress enough the importance of, if you really want to be good with your gun, be good with your gun in situations that are less sterile.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So, all right, you covered 3 really good tips, and so I asked for 5. You got 2 more. I want to talk about 2 products.
Okay.
So, Area 419. What are your 2 favorite products that will help increase your effectiveness in the long range game?
So what products should do is eliminate variables that can be eliminated. If we had a product that would eliminate the wind variable, man, we'd sell a whole lot of them.
You would be a rich man.
We would be quite wealthy. But outside of the goofy, like LiDAR style rangefinders that say they can read the wind for you, which is, that's some deep stuff. The 2 products that we sell that really make a big difference for long range shooters, one is a good muzzle device. Our Hellfire muzzle brake has been immensely popular among competitive shooters, enthusiast hunters, because what a muzzle brake's meant to do, there are a lot of people that get upset saying, "Well, it's just a 6.5 Creedmoor, it ain't got no recoil." Well, it does. It does. And a good muzzle brake's not just about the idea of taking pressure off your shoulder. It's about allowing you to continue to gather downrange information after you pull the trigger. And when you are, let's stay with hunting, if you're taking a shot and you pull the trigger and that gun jumps and you don't get to see what happens downrange, it may not hurt your shoulder, but if you don't have anything on, the gun's going to move. Mm-hmm. When that gun jumps and you don't get to see what happens downrange, you don't know, did you hit that animal? Is it dead right there? Was it stop and flop? Did you miss and it ran off behind the ridge? Is it wounded? Which way did it go? Are you going to be able to track? So the idea of a good muzzle device allowing you, and if you missed altogether, where did you miss? Why did you miss? Did you miss high? Did you miss left? Did you right? Low? Like, you need to know that. Because maybe you can get a second shot on that animal. Maybe they don't know what happened, but you saw the rock just to the left of the animal spark, and that's where it went. So you can make that correction, come over, and then make a good ethical shot. A good muzzle device is about controlling the rifle in a way that's going to give you more data downrange after you pull the trigger and allow you for more accountability of that projectile. As shooters, one of our great responsibilities is to understand what happened when that bullet left the gun. Where to go? What happened? Are we accountable for that projectile? We are, but we have to know where it went to truly be accountable for what happened. So a good muzzle device makes shooting, if you're laying behind a gun all day long, more pleasant because you're not gonna eat that force. But if you're a hunter, you're going to have a greater ability to gather information after you pull the trigger. So a good muzzle device is something that should be on a rifle. Another thing that has become really popular for us is our Arca-Lock system. And, this has become big enough that even big names like Daniel Defense now has Arca-Lock on their new Delta 5 Pro. Arca, in general, is the kind of broad term for an 1.5 inch wide, 45-degree dovetail rail that is becoming popular on the forend of rifles. And the reason that that's popular is, A, with your bipod, it gives you a lot of adjustability up and down the forend, but it also gives you the ability to drop into a tripod and hard lock in. Our Arca-Lock rails are meant to be added to rifles that don't have this natively. And the ability of a shooter to take their rifle, drop it into a tripod. Really Right Stuff is kind of the standard bearer for these tripods, but you've got a lot of other brands doing them. Vortex just rolled out a line of them. You guys carry BogPod. I believe BogPod now has an Arca product.
Yep.
And then there are other really fast-growing brands. I got a buddy at Two Vets Tripods. He's got some really good stuff that he's working on. Arca tripods have been around forever in the camera world.
Yeah, you look into the camera industry.
They've all been using it for a long time.
So,
yeah.
And if you're shooting a camera at long distances, you need to be stable. It makes sense.
And you need to have the adjustability. So you need to be able to hard lock in and have some adjustability. We've started selling a lot of these actually to outfitters. So if you are an outfitter or a guide, what you really want at the end of the day is for the guy that comes and drops big money on that mule deer hunt. You didn't pull a tag, your wife did. She cannot be the only one in the household that pulled the tag. So you're going to go spend some money on a mule deer hunt. What that guide really wants is for the people that are there to have a greater shot at a nicer animal with a higher rate of success. And since most hunting is done from at least seated, if not standing, being able to lock a rifle into a tripod, bank vault solid, and take away a lot of those difficulties that may come from positional shooting. It's more difficult to shoot standing than it is prone. It's just how it is.
Absolutely.
And being able to use new equipment to the market to reduce the variable of that rifle wanting to move around when you're in a less than ideal position, it allows people to increase their maximum effective range by what can be a considerable amount pretty quickly. So if you're a hunter that understands that shooting sticks are better than nothing, but they're still pretty tough to shoot off of and really be solid when you start shooting at distance. The idea of taking a rifle and putting down a sandbag on top of a fence post and shooting, that's cool too, but it can also be difficult. Like, that's a skill you need to learn. The idea of being able to lock into a tripod, be solid, and go it's easier to learn. It's more user-friendly. It's very solid, and it is a piece of gear or piece of kit that is very, very, very common. Almost, it's everywhere in the competitive community, but in the hunting community, it's really growing quickly as people realize that it's not an easy button. There are no easy buttons, but it's a piece of equipment that can reduce a lot of variables that come with the idea of you got to have that rifle be still and do it pretty simply. Easy to install, easy to use, easy to understand.
It makes a lot of sense, just becoming more efficient, especially if you're hunting out west. Like you got your tripod that's got one of them Arca plates. Like, you can use it for your spotting scope, and then you can take your spotting scope off and you can use it on your rifle. That means you're packing less, putting less weight on your back, reducing that stress level when you're walking over that hill and see that animal. So it really just makes a lot of sense, and just removing one less variable that can affect your accuracy.
When you're behind the rifle and you're going to take a shot on an animal, you get a lot of things going through your head. The fewer things that can go through your head, the better. Because at the end of the day, all I really want you to think about is, you know, you've ranged that animal. You got out your laser rangefinder. You know that animal's 512 yards away, whatever it is. You know that based on the dope card that you generated and then trued up back at the range, that you're going to have this much drop. You know that, you can start to tell that your wind's going to be about this amount. You know what size the vital region is on that animal. You're really making, all I want you to be thinking about is, do I know enough to make this shot? And should I? Because that's the big question when you're a hunter is, can I and should I pull the trigger here?
Definitely two questions you need to be thinking about.
And if those are the only two questions that you have to worry about because you've been able to eliminate a lot of these other variables, that's a good situation to be in.
Absolutely. So, you know what? Excellent information, Craig.
Yeah, man.
You went through a lot of stuff. It takes a little bit to absorb,
and there's so much more.
I mean, we've just hardly scratched the surface. But
the beauty of long range is that the rabbit hole is seemingly infinitely deep. So, if you want something to get into, a hobby, a sport, a way, a discipline in shooting that you can really go deep on and spend a lifetime learning about, long range is absolutely one of those options.
For sure. Ton of fun.
Yeah, man.
It's it takes a while to learn, takes probably a lifetime to perfect, but you can have a lot of fun with it.
It's a gratifying thing. It's a fun thing. It's cool to be able to think about what we are capable of today that not very long ago would have been either impossible or much more difficult to do. So I think it's cool. I love it, obviously.
100%. That's why you do what you do.
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
That's why you're here this week.
Yeah, man.
So
yeah, and kudos to you guys for having all of your team together for Hunting University. We have 220 dealers around the world. We work with a lot of organizations, and there is, that I know of, no other organization that makes the investment into employee training that the SCHEELS organization makes. I was just talking to another dealer. I stopped and talked to somebody when I landed and was driving here and told them what I was going to do. And they were another dealer. They were competitive. Their store is near one of your stores. And they said, look, I don't like to compliment anybody that we compete against, but what SCHEELS does with training is unreal. They are the size they are. You guys are at 26 stores or something now?
Yeah, we just announced 2 more. So
goodness. Send the POs,
yeah, we likely will.
Yeah, at that number of stores, for it to be a real in-person thing and not just a log onto the computer and watch videos and do quizzes, that's tough. It's expensive. It's a commitment. But it's one of the reasons that the SCHEELS organization is growing the way that it is, because somebody can walk into one of your stores and know that, the person walking around in the polo with the name tag is more than just checking a box by the organization. There's been an investment into this person. When I go to the gun counter and ask that guy a question, the odds that they know more than what's on the tag, it's real at a SCHEELS. That's not real at a lot of other especially as you get larger organizations.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and it is super important to us. I mean, when we train our experts, they're just going to be better equipped to help the consumer who walks in get exactly what they need.
Yeah, that's what matters. It's not selling things for the sake of selling things. It's getting across the line on what do we have here that can make their life better in the most reasonable way. What can they do?
Like, we want you to have success out there.
Yeah.
And we also want you to share them with us on social media. We got a thing called Trophy Tuesday every Tuesday.
Trophy Tuesday, okay.
Every Tuesday on our stories, it's dedicated to customer photos. Share their success with us.
Well, that's perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's a lot of fun. So we covered a ton of stuff. We talked about some products. So we're gonna have as much of that as we can linked in the description of this podcast. So. If you jotted it down on a piece of paper when we talked about it, that's great. If not, we're going to get that stuff linked below. So, Craig, thank you so much for your
thanks
time
for having
and
me,
for
man.
your information. I'm going to probably have to listen to this again just so I can remember all that stuff. So,
Sounds good, man.
all right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast. Stay tuned for future segments and visit our social media pages, SCHEELS Outdoors on Facebook and Instagram for daily updates.